Sarah died in the street, sir. In the street. I didn't even have a chance to tell my daughter that I loved her that night. This girl knew what she was going to do to my daughter.
And, she said that she wished I would stab her.
Who said that?
Janet.
Said, I wish you'd stab me?
Yeah, she said, I bet you won't stab me, I wish you would. And, when Sarah was hitting me, I went to hit her, and I really did not mean stab her. I'm not going to kill somebody.
I'm going to stab you and your Mexican boyfriend. Those chilling words were left on Sarah Ludeman's voicemail, a threat from Rachel Wade that would set the stage for a fateful night. Sarah, a bright and determined young woman, decided she wouldn't be intimidated any longer. She drove to confront Rachel, unaware of the simmering rage and jealousy that awaited her. But what Sarah didn't know was that Rachel wasn't just angry, she was prepared. A knife in hand, her mind set, the stage was set for a confrontation that would leave only one question. How far can jealousy push someone? What happened that night? The answers lie in the tragic events that followed. Sarah Ludeman was the cherished only child of Gay and Charles Ludeman, born on December 7, 1990, in Pinellas Park, Florida. Her upbringing was filled with love and support, with her parents placing high hopes on her bright future. Sarah was a model student, consistently earning straight A's and aspiring to become a veterinarian, a career choice that reflected her deep love for animals and her compassionate nature. Her academic achievements were a source of immense pride for her parents, who had long desired a child. Sarah's life was characterized by a strong sense of responsibility and a focus on her studies, making her a standout among her peers. Unlike many teenagers, Sarah wasn't interested in the typical high school dating scene. She was content with focusing on her goals, maintaining close friendships, and nurturing her dream of caring for animals. However, everything changed when she met Joshua Camacho, a young man with a magnetic personality and a job at the local Chick-fil-A. Joshua, with his charming demeanor and confident air, quickly captivated Sarah's attention. Their relationship began as an innocent connection, but soon developed into what Sarah believed to be a profound and serious romance. Joshua's attention was intoxicating for Sarah, who until then had not experienced such intense emotions. Yet Joshua was far from the ideal partner Sarah imagined. Beneath his charm lay a complex and manipulative individual who was juggling relationships with multiple women. Unknown to Sarah, Joshua was also romantically involved with Rachel Wade, a young woman whose life had taken a much different trajectory. Rachel Wade's background starkly contrasted with Sarah's. Born into a less stable environment, Rachel had dropped out of high school at just 16, a decision that set her on a tumultuous path. She quickly moved out of her parents' home, supporting herself by working as a waitress at Applebee's and renting her own apartment. Independent yet troubled, Rachel was known for her flirtatious behavior, a reputation that followed her from high school. Despite dating various boys, she became deeply infatuated with Joshua, viewing him as the one stable element in her otherwise chaotic life. This infatuation turned obsessive, and as Joshua continued to play both women against each other, Rachel's fixation on him grew. The situation quickly devolved into a toxic love triangle, with Rachel and Sarah finding themselves in a bitter rivalry. The tension between them was palpable and only worsened as they both vied for Joshua's attention. What began as verbal harassment soon escalated. Rachel and Sarah exchanged threatening voicemails, filled with vitriol and resentment. Their confrontations became increasingly public and hostile. Sarah, who was once focused on her future, was now consumed by this rivalry. She and her friends would go out of their way to antagonize Rachel, following her, intentionally bumping into her car, and even engaging in juvenile pranks like spraying her with silly string. Rachel, in turn, retaliated with her own threats, often warning Sarah to stay away from Joshua, who seemed to relish the attention and drama that surrounded him. Despite the hostile atmosphere, Sarah remained blinded by her feelings for Joshua. She was convinced that he was worth fighting for, despite the growing animosity and the increasingly dangerous situation. The emotional turmoil, fueled by jealousy and competition, continued to escalate, with neither woman willing to back down. As the months passed, the rivalry between Sarah Ludeman and Rachel Wade only intensified. The confrontations became more frequent and more heated, each one bringing them closer to the inevitable tragedy that would unfold. By April 2009, the rivalry had reached a critical point. The once verbal threats had become more menacing, and the simmering hostility was ready to explode. On April 14th, Rachel Wade learned that Joshua was spending time with Sarah. Consumed by anger and frustration, Rachel made a fateful phone call to Sarah, delivering a chilling threat. "I'm going to stab you and your Mexican boyfriend." This statement would later become a focal point in the legal proceedings, underscoring the premeditated nature of the violence that was about to occur. That night, Sarah was at Joshua's house when she received yet another threatening call from Rachel. This time, Sarah's response was different, perhaps driven by a mixture of fear, anger, and exhaustion from the ongoing harassment. Sarah decided she would no longer be passive. She chose to confront Rachel head-on. Sarah got into her parents' minivan and drove to Rachel's apartment, her mind likely racing with a mix of emotions, determination, defiance, perhaps even a hope that this confrontation might finally bring an end to the hostility. Rachel, on the other hand, had already steeled herself for the encounter. Anticipating that Sarah might come to confront her, she armed herself with a razor-sharp steak knife. This simple kitchen tool, in Rachel's hands, would soon become a deadly weapon. As Sarah arrived at Rachel's apartment, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Both young women were on edge, driven by a mixture of fear, anger, and a misguided sense of resolve. The confrontation that ensued was brief but catastrophic. As Sarah approached in her minivan, Rachel, armed with the knife, was ready to strike. In a matter of moments, the situation spiraled out of control. Rachel attacked, stabbing Sarah twice, once in the shoulder and once in the chest. The latter blow punctured Sarah's heart, a wound so forceful that the knife itself was bent out of shape. The violent encounter was witnessed by several bystanders, who immediately called 911. Sarah was quickly rushed to the hospital, but the injuries she sustained were too severe. Despite the efforts of medical personnel, Sarah Ludeman was pronounced dead in the early hours of April 15, 2009. The life of a bright and promising young woman was abruptly ended, and the consequences of that night would reverberate through the lives of everyone involved. In the hours following the tragic confrontation, Rachel Wade was quickly apprehended by the police. The gravity of the situation hit Rachel hard when she learned that Sarah Ludeman had died from the stabbing. As she broke down, investigators began to piece together the events that led to the tragic incident. Witnesses, including Joshua Camacho, identified Rachel as the attacker, corroborating their accounts with the menacing voicemail she had left for Sarah. These messages, filled with threats, became pivotal evidence as the case unfolded. Rachel Wade was soon charged with second-degree murder, a serious accusation that would place her at the center of a highly publicized trial. Her defense hinged on a claim of self-defense, arguing that Sarah had aggressively approached her with the minivan, leaving Rachel no choice but to protect herself. However, the prosecution painted a different picture, one where Rachel's actions were not spontaneous but premeditated. The voicemails she left were presented as proof of her intent to cause harm. The trial was closely followed by the media, becoming a symbol of how intense emotions and rivalries can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Emotional testimonies from friends and family provided a window into the destructive nature of the love triangle that had entangled Rachel, Sarah, and Joshua. Joshua Camacho's testimony added another layer of complexity to the case. Despite earlier statements to the police about his relationships with both women, he denied being romantically involved with either during the trial, contradicting himself and leaving an air of uncertainty around his role in the tragic events. In September 2010, after deliberating on the evidence, the jury found Rachel Wade guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 27 years in prison, a punishment that reflected the severity of the crime and the irreversible loss of Sarah Ludeman's life. Rachel was incarcerated at the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala, where she remains to this day. Her earliest possible release date, a distant hope for freedom, is set for September 29, 2032. The Rachel Wade and Sarah Ludeman case continues to resonate as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked jealousy and emotional turmoil. The incident is often cited in discussions around teen violence, highlighting how volatile emotions, when left unchecked, can escalate into tragic outcomes. Years after the trial, those connected to the case still reflect on the profound loss. Sarah Ludeman's life was abruptly ended, while Rachel Wade's life was irrevocably altered by her actions, resulting in a lengthy prison sentence. Rachel has reportedly expressed regret for the incident, but the weight of her sentence and the loss of 2 young lives continues to resonate. In prison, Rachel's story is used as a cautionary example in educational settings, highlighting the importance of responsible decision-making during adolescence. The narrative underscores the destructive power of jealousy and how it can spiral into violence if left unchecked. Joshua Camacho, the individual at the center of the feud, chose to remove himself from the public eye after the trial. He moved out of state, seeking to escape the intense media scrutiny that followed the case. Since then, he has lived a quiet life, distancing himself from the tragic events that unfolded. For the Ludeman family, the loss of Sarah was devastating. As their only daughter, Sarah's death left an irreplaceable void in their lives. The bright and ambitious young woman who had dreamed of becoming a veterinarian was remembered by her family and community as someone full of potential. Her death prompted reflection within the Pinellas Park community, with many questioning how such a situation could have escalated to such a deadly conclusion. So what are your thoughts on this case? Could this tragedy have been prevented, or was it an inevitable result of unchecked emotions spiraling out of control? How do you think the involvement of social pressures and Joshua Camacho's role contributed to this devastating outcome? We'd love to hear your opinions. Share them in the comments below.
Harris, a well-known dentist, killed her husband, an orthodontist, in a hotel parking lot after confronting him and his mistress over their affair. It was caught on camera by private investigators hired by Harris. Her teenage stepdaughter was in the car at the time of the killing, and the case became infamous around the world.
In the shadowy parking lot of the Nassau Bay Hilton Hotel, a silver Mercedes-Benz suddenly surged forward, its engine growling with intent. Behind the wheel, Clara Harris's grip tightened, her thoughts fueled by betrayal and fury. Her target was clear, her husband, David, and his lover, Gail Bridges. In a moment of irreversible decision, Clara struck, running over David again and again, ensuring he would never rise again. What could push a person to such deadly extremes? How did a once respected dentist and mother become the central figure in one of the most shocking slayings cases of our time? But before we dive deeper into the mystery, I'd like to ask for a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future cases, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss out on any new videos. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the case. Clara Suarez was born and raised in Colombia, where she developed an early passion for helping others, which eventually led her to pursue a career in dentistry. Her ambition drove her to move to the United States, a land she viewed as full of opportunities where she could fulfill her dreams. Clara's determination and work ethic paid off as she successfully earned her degree in dentistry. Settling in Friendswood, Texas, Clara quickly established herself as a skilled and compassionate dentist, building a thriving practice that became well respected within the community. Her hard work didn't go unnoticed, and her practice became a beacon of success. Friendswood, known for its close-knit community and suburban charm, was an ideal place for Clara to plant her roots. It was during this flourishing period of her life that she met David Harris, an orthodontist whose practice was just as successful as hers. David was charismatic, well-liked, and shared Clara's passion for the medical field. Their professional lives complemented each other perfectly, and it wasn't long before their relationship turned romantic. The couple's wedding in 1992 was a significant event. marking the union of two accomplished professionals who were seen as a power couple in their social circles. They blended their lives both personally and professionally, often working together and supporting each other's careers. Their marriage seemed idyllic, a true partnership that others admired. With their combined incomes, Clara and David were able to afford a beautiful home in an affluent neighborhood, a symbol of the success they had worked so hard to achieve. Soon after their marriage, Clara and David were blessed with twin sons who became the center of their world. Clara, in particular, was devoted to her children, pouring her energy into ensuring they had a nurturing and supportive environment. She also welcomed Lindsay, David's daughter from a previous marriage, into the family, striving to create a harmonious and loving home. To the outside world, the Harris family appeared to have everything: a successful marriage, a beautiful family, and financial security. They embodied the American dream, living in a comfortable, upscale community and enjoying the fruits of their hard work. However, beneath this picture-perfect exterior, strains began to develop. The demands of running two successful practices left David with little time for his family, and he began to grow distant. His frequent absences, which he attributed to work obligations, became a source of tension between him and Clara. Clara, who had always been attentive and dedicated to maintaining their relationship, began to notice the subtle changes in David's behavior, his late nights, his distracted demeanor, and his decreasing interest in family life. Despite her suspicions, Clara was determined to keep her marriage intact. She was deeply committed to the life they had built together and refused to acknowledge the possibility that something might be wrong. She continued to present a facade of happiness to the world, ignoring the growing cracks in their relationship. But as time passed, the emotional distance between them became more apparent, and Clara's unease grew. In 2001, Clara's worst fears were realized when she discovered that David was having an affair with Gail Bridges, a receptionist at his orthodontic practice. The affair, which had started as a casual fling, quickly escalated into a serious relationship. David and Gail began spending increasing amounts of time together, meeting secretly and even spending weekends and holidays together, all while David lied to Clara about his whereabouts. Clara, desperate to know the truth, hired a private investigator to follow David and gather evidence of his infidelity. The investigator's findings were devastating. David was not only unfaithful, but he was deeply involved with Gail, treating her as more than just a mistress. He had become emotionally attached to her, and their affair had become a central part of his life. This revelation shattered Clara. The life she had worked so hard to build was crumbling before her eyes, and the man she had loved and trusted had betrayed her in the most painful way possible. Feeling humiliated and heartbroken, Clara confronted David about the affair. At first, David denied everything, trying to downplay the relationship. But as Clara presented him with the evidence collected by the investigator, he could no longer lie. He admitted to the affair, but his confession did little to ease Clara's pain. She was desperate to save her marriage and pleaded with David to end the relationship with Gail and return to their family. David agreed, but his promises were empty. He continued to see Gail, further deepening Clara's sense of betrayal and despair. As the affair continued, Clara became increasingly obsessed with the idea of confronting Gail and reclaiming her husband. Despite David's assurances that the affair was over, Clara's instincts told her otherwise. She became fixated on Gail, viewing her as the obstacle standing between her and the life she had once enjoyed. Clara's need for control and her overwhelming desire to hold on to the life she had built led her down a path of desperation. Her emotions, once rooted in love and commitment, turned into a dangerous mix of anger, jealousy, and fear, ultimately setting the stage for the tragic events that would follow. On July 24, 2002, the tipping point came when the private investigator Clara had hired to track David's movements called her with the shocking news. David and Gail were at the Nassau Bay Hilton Hotel, a location they had turned into their clandestine meeting spot. This was the confirmation Clara had dreaded, yet expected. Her worst fears were not only realized, but vividly playing out just a few miles away. Overcome with a mix of rage, desperation, and a deep sense of betrayal, Clara made a fateful decision. She grabbed the keys to her silver Mercedes-Benz, her mind racing with thoughts of confronting the woman who had stolen her husband. In a moment of tragic irony, she took her stepdaughter, Lindsay, along for the ride. Lindsay, who was just 16 years old, had been caught in the crossfire of her family's unraveling. She was close to her father, and the events of that night would leave her emotionally scarred for life. As Clara drove to the Hilton, her emotions were at a boiling point. The anger that had been simmering for months was now threatening to explode. The closer she got to the hotel, the more her thoughts were consumed by the need to confront David and Gail, to make them face the pain they had caused her. The drive, which likely felt like an eternity, was a turning point, a journey from which there would be no return. When Clara arrived at the Hilton, she marched into the lobby with a single-minded determination. Her eyes quickly locked onto David and Gail, who were laughing and enjoying each other's company as if they hadn't a care in the world. The sight was too much for Clara to bear. In an instant her anger took over, and she lunged at Gail, grabbing her hair and shouting accusations. The confrontation was loud and chaotic, with hotel staff and guests looking on in shock and disbelief. David, caught off guard, tried to intervene, but the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Security personnel rushed in to break up the fight, and Gail, visibly shaken, retreated to the safety of the elevator with David. But Clara's fury was far from spent. As she stormed out of the hotel, her mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge. The humiliation she had just experienced in the lobby only added fuel to the fire. Her emotions were no longer under her control. They were driving her toward a tragic and irreversible decision. Back in the car, Clara saw David and Gail in the parking lot, walking toward David's vehicle. In that split second, all the anger, pain, and betrayal boiled over. Clara floored the gas pedal, her only thought being to make David pay for what he had done. The car accelerated rapidly, and before anyone could react, David was struck by the vehicle. He was thrown to the ground, but Clara wasn't finished. Blinded by rage, she circled back and ran over his body multiple times, ensuring that he would not survive the attack. The entire incident was captured on video by the private investigator, who had been documenting David's activities as part of Clara's efforts to catch him in the act. The footage would later become crucial evidence in the case against Clara, showing in graphic detail the lengths to which she had gone in her quest for vengeance. Inside the car, Lindsay witnessed the entire horrific scene unfold. The trauma of seeing her father die in such a violent and deliberate manner would haunt her for the rest of her life. The emotional scars left by that night would never fully heal, leaving her with a burden that no child should have to bear. What transpired after the incident was chaotic. Hotel guests and staff rushed to the scene, and someone quickly called 911. Clara, now in shock, stood by as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. David Harris was pronounced dead at the scene, his body mangled from the repeated impacts of the car. Clara, who had moments earlier been consumed by rage, now found herself grappling with the consequences of her actions. She was arrested on the spot and charged with taking a life in first degree. This shocking act of violence marked the tragic end of what had once been a picture-perfect marriage. The incident at the Hilton Hotel was not just a crime. It was the culmination of months of emotional turmoil, betrayal, and despair. Clara Harris, once a respected dentist and loving mother, was now at the center of a serious trial. The legal battle began in January 2003, capturing the public's attention due to the sensational nature of the crime. A scorned wife using her luxury car as a weapon to unalive her cheating husband. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and legal experts, all eager to witness the unfolding of this tragic and dramatic case. From the outset, the prosecution built its case around the damning video footage captured by the private investigator, which showed Clara running over her husband David multiple times with her Mercedes-Benz. This footage was played repeatedly in the courtroom, each time eliciting gasps from the audience and reinforcing the prosecution's argument that Clara's actions were not just impulsive, but deliberate and premeditated. The prosecutor emphasized that Clara had not only tracked her husband's movements with the help of a private investigator, but had driven to the hotel with the full intention of catching him in the act with Gail Bridges. They argued that her actions were driven by an intense desire for revenge, making the case for first-degree slaying. The defense, however, painted a vastly different picture of Clara. They portrayed her as a loving wife and mother who had been pushed to her breaking point by the emotional torment of her husband's betrayal. Clara's attorneys argued that on the night of the incident, she had acted in a sudden passion, a term in Texas law that can reduce a slaying charge to manslaughter if the crime is committed in the heat of the moment without premeditation. They claimed that Clara had not planned to take David's life. Instead, she was overwhelmed by the pain and humiliation of discovering her husband's ongoing affair, leading to a momentary lapse in judgment. The defense also focused on Clara's character, calling numerous witnesses to testify about her kindness, generosity, and dedication to her family. Friends, relatives, and colleagues described Clara as a compassionate person who had always put her family first. They recounted stories of her selflessness, painting a picture of a woman who had been utterly devastated by her husband's infidelity. The defense hoped that by humanizing Clara, they could convince the jury that her actions, while tragic, were not those of a cold-blooded assailant. One of the most emotionally charged moments of the trial came when Lindsay Harris, David's daughter from his first marriage, took the stand. Lindsay, who had been in the car with Clara on the night of the incident, provided a first-hand account of the events leading up to her father's death. Her testimony was heartbreaking and pivotal, as she described in detail how Clara had circled back in the parking lot to ensure that David was dead. Lindsay's words added a layer of tragedy to the case, highlighting the deep emotional turmoil that Clara had been experiencing, but also underscoring the brutality of her actions. The trial was a battle of narratives, one side presenting Clara as a vengeful wife who had coldly plotted her husband's demise, and the other as a heartbroken woman who had acted impulsively in a moment of unbearable pain. The jury was left to sift through these conflicting stories, weighing the evidence and the emotional testimony presented by both sides. After several hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict on February 14, 2003. Clara Harris was found guilty of taking a life, but the jury showed some leniency in their sentencing. Acknowledging the emotional circumstances that led to the crime, they sentenced her to 20 years in prison, the minimum for a slaying conviction in Texas. Additionally, Clara was ordered to pay a $10,000 fine, a relatively small amount considering the gravity of the crime. The sentence was a reflection of the jury's belief that while Clara's actions were undeniably criminal, they were also the result of an extraordinary emotional breakdown. The trial marked the end of a tragic saga, leaving behind a shattered family and a story that would be remembered as one of the most dramatic and heartbreaking cases of its time. Clara's conviction brought some closure to the case, but it also raised questions about the role of emotion in violent crimes, the pressures of maintaining the appearance of a perfect life, and the devastating consequences of betrayal. Following her conviction, Clara Harris was sent to the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, a facility known for housing some of the state's most high-profile female inmates. Once there, Clara's focus shifted from the intense scrutiny of her trial to the quieter, more introspective life behind bars. She quickly adapted to the regimented prison routine, deliberately avoiding any further attention and choosing instead to concentrate on her work assignments and personal development. Despite the high-profile nature of her crime, Clara managed to maintain a low profile, dedicating herself to self-improvement and rehabilitation. Clara's behavior during her incarceration was described as exemplary. She engaged in various rehabilitation programs, not just as a participant, but also as a leader and mentor to other inmates. Her involvement in these programs reflected her desire to contribute positively within the prison community, and she earned respect from both fellow inmates and prison staff. Clara took on leadership roles, guiding other inmates through educational and self-help courses, which highlighted her commitment to personal growth and her willingness to help others do the same. These efforts were instrumental in her eventual eligibility for parole. Clara's transformation from a notorious figure in a sensational crime to a model prisoner did not go unnoticed by the parole board. Her participation in rehabilitation programs, coupled with her good behavior, strengthened her case for early release. In November 2017, after serving 15 years of her 20-year sentence, Clara was granted parole. The decision to release her early was met with mixed reactions from the public. Some viewed her release as a justified reward for her good behavior and rehabilitation efforts, believing that she had paid her debt to society and deserved the opportunity to rebuild her life. Others, however, felt that the gravity of her crime warranted a longer sentence, and were concerned about her reintegration into society. Upon her release in 2018, Clara Harris was determined to distance herself from the notoriety that had surrounded her for so long. She moved away from Houston, the city where the crime had taken place, seeking to live a life of relative obscurity. Clara's primary focus was on reconnecting with her twin sons, who had been raised by relatives during her incarceration. Reestablishing her relationship with them was a top priority, as she sought to make up for the years she had lost. Since her release, Clara has largely avoided the public eye. Unlike many others who have been at the center of high-profile cases, she chose not to engage with the media or make public statements about her past. The once intense media attention that had surrounded her case gradually faded, allowing Clara to live out her days away from the scrutiny that had once been so pervasive. Little is known about her current whereabouts or activities, as she has made a concerted effort to keep her life private. Her decision to remain out of the spotlight reflects a desire to move on from the past and to quietly rebuild her life in the shadows of her former notoriety. However, the aftermath of David Harris's death left deep, lasting wounds on the Harris family, particularly on their children. Clara and David's twin sons, who were just 4 years old at the time of the slaying, were thrust into a world of turmoil and uncertainty. With their father dead and their mother incarcerated, the boys were left without the two most important figures in their lives during their crucial formative years. Their sense of security was shattered as they were placed in the care of extended family members, separated from the comforting presence of their mother. Growing up without their parents, the twins had to navigate the complexities of childhood and adolescence while carrying the burden of their family's tragic history. The absence of their father meant they missed out on the guidance and support he could have provided, while their mother's incarceration deprived them of her nurturing and love. The emotional scars from this period have undoubtedly shaped their lives, influencing their development in ways that may never fully be understood by those outside their immediate circle. Despite the challenges, the twins have remained largely out of the public eye, their privacy fiercely protected by the family members who took them in. Lindsay Harris, David's daughter from a previous marriage, was also deeply affected by the events of that night. As a teenager, she was old enough to fully grasp the horror of what had happened, and the trauma of witnessing her father's death at the hands of a woman she had once considered a mother figure left her emotionally scarred. Lindsay's relationship with Clara had always been complex, marked by the typical tensions between a stepmother and stepdaughter, but the events of July 24, 2002, transformed that relationship into something much darker. During the trial, Lindsay's testimony was a pivotal moment, as she recounted the harrowing details of the night her father was slain. Her words underscored the emotional devastation that Clara's actions had caused, not just for Lindsay but for the entire family. The Harris family, once seemingly perfect, was left in shambles. Relationships were strained, and the bonds that had held them together were tested to their limits. Clara's extended family, particularly her parents and siblings, were also deeply affected by the tragedy. They remained supportive of Clara throughout her trial and incarceration, standing by her even as the media scrutiny intensified. The trial was a harrowing experience for them, as they watched their loved one become the central figure in a case that captured national attention. Their unity was tested, but they continued to hope for leniency and prayed for Clara's eventual release, believing in her capacity for rehabilitation. On the other side, David's family struggled with their own grief and anger. The loss of a son and brother in such a violent and public manner was a devastating blow, compounded by the constant media coverage that made it difficult to grieve privately. The public nature of the case meant that their pain was on display for all to see, and the division between Clara's supporters and David's family became more pronounced as the trial progressed. The trial and its aftermath left both families grappling with the fallout, as they tried to make sense of the senseless and find a way to move forward. In the years following Clara's conviction, both families attempted to rebuild their lives. Clara's release from prison in 2018 brought mixed emotions. For some, it was a moment of relief, a chance to reunite with her and begin the process of healing. For others, it was a painful reminder of the crime that had torn their family apart, with lingering feelings that justice had not fully been served. As we close this chapter, it's worth considering the lasting impact of Clara's actions on those who survived. Can time truly heal such deep scars? Or do the echoes of that night continue to haunt those left behind? How should justice weigh the emotional turmoil behind such crimes? Share your thoughts below. What do you think drove Clara to her breaking point?
What did they do that was so bad that you were willing for them to be killed?
Nothing.
Did you think about the next morning my parents will be dead? You had 2 little brothers in the house. What was going to happen with them?
I didn't really think about that too much.
Terry Caffey stumbled through the dark woods, his body battered and bloodied, barely holding on to life. Every inch he crawled felt like an eternity, but he pressed on, determined to survive. He had been shot 5 times, his home engulfed in flames behind him, and his family, they were gone. As he finally reached the home of his neighbors, Tommy and Helen Gaston, he collapsed at their door, gasping for breath, drenched in blood. What could have driven someone to commit such a senseless act of violence? Who could have orchestrated the brutal murder of Terry's entire family? The answers to these haunting questions would send shockwaves through the small town of Alba, Texas. The truth, when it came to light, would leave the community reeling. Behind the loving facade of a devoted family, dark secrets simmered, secrets that led to one of the most chilling betrayals imaginable. What led to the violent destruction of a family so deeply rooted in faith and community? How could a daughter, raised with love and care, become the mastermind of such a brutal crime? What drove this once happy family into a night of unimaginable horror? But before we dive deeper into the mystery, I'd like to ask for a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future cases, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss out on any new videos. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the case. The Caffey family, deeply rooted in their faith, was an integral part of the local community in Alba, Texas. Terry Caffey, the head of the household, was training to become a minister, and his wife Penny was actively involved in the church, often found at the piano, her fingers gracing the keys during Sunday services. Their 2 sons, Matthew and Tyler, were also musically inclined, with Matthew playing the harmonica and Tyler strumming the guitar, adding a youthful vibrance to the church's musical ensemble. It wasn't uncommon for the congregation to witness the entire Caffey family involved in service, creating a picture of unity and grace that resonated with everyone who knew them. Then there was Aaron, the eldest child, a 16-year-old, who had a voice that could move even the most hardened of hearts. Aaron's singing was more than just a performance. It was a deeply emotional expression of her faith. Often her voice would tremble with emotion. Tears would stream down her face as she sang hymns that spoke of love, salvation, and the closeness of God. People admired Erin for her talent, and she was considered a bright young woman with a promising future, one firmly grounded in her family's values. The Caffeys homeschooled their children, a choice made to ensure that the strong moral and religious foundation they valued remained intact. The children were raised in a sheltered environment, far from the distractions and temptations of the world outside. This decision reflected the family's deep commitment to nurturing not only academic success, but also spiritual growth. Their home, located in a rural and peaceful part of Alba, was far removed from the hustle and bustle of the town. The cafe's modest house was a sanctuary of sorts, where love, discipline, and faith guided their daily lives. It was a place where the family prayed together, shared meals, and enjoyed one another's company in the safety and security of their rural surroundings. But 2007 brought a significant shift in Erin's life. For the first time, she stepped outside the boundaries of her sheltered home life when she took a part-time job at the local Sonic drive-in. This job, while seemingly mundane, introduced her to a world her parents had tried to shield her from. It was here that she met 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson, a young man who was everything her parents weren't. Charlie was rough around the edges, with a rugged, rebellious personality. He was not part of the church-going crowd that Erin was used to. Instead, Charlie lived a life of freedom, one that revolved around hanging out with friends, drinking, and generally defying the norms of the quiet, religious community. Charlie's personality captivated Erin, who had grown up under strict parental guidance. For the first time, she experienced a kind of independence and excitement that had been absent from her life. Charlie, recognizing Erin's sheltered upbringing, showered her with attention and affection, making her feel special. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and it wasn't long before Charlie gave Erin a promise ring, a symbol of their devotion to one another. In Erin's mind, this relationship was a gateway to the freedom she had longed for, a break from the confines of her controlled, disciplined life. At first, Terry and Penny Caffey didn't mind Erin dating Charlie. They saw it as part of her growing up, believing it to be a harmless teenage romance. However, as the months passed, they began to notice unsettling changes in their daughter's behavior. Erin, once the dedicated student and dutiful daughter, began to drift away from the values they had worked so hard to instill in her. Her grades at school started slipping, a stark contrast to her previous academic performance. Worse yet, her focus on family and church activities diminished. Erin was no longer as involved in church as she once was, and her parents noticed her becoming more secretive, often staying up late talking to Charlie, breaking her phone curfew, and showing a lack of interest in the family's church commitments. Concerned, Terry and Penny decided to investigate further. They soon discovered Charlie's MySpace page, a window into a world that horrified them. His profile was filled with references to partying, drinking, and sexual content activities that directly contradicted the values they had raised their daughter to uphold. The Caffeys, alarmed by what they saw, realized that Charlie's influence was pulling Erin away from everything they had taught her. This young man, they believed, was dangerous for Erin's future. They decided that the relationship had to end. In February 2008, After Erin broke her phone curfew by continuing to speak with Charlie late into the night, her parents confronted her. It was a pivotal moment in the family's dynamic. Terry and Penny, desperate to regain control of the situation, demanded that Erin end the relationship with Charlie Wilkinson. They were firm in their decision, believing that cutting off this unhealthy relationship would allow Erin to refocus on her education and her spiritual life. At first, Erin appeared to comply. She told her parents that she understood their concerns and agreed to stop seeing Charlie. Her parents, relieved, believed that the situation had been resolved. They trusted that Erin would abide by their wishes and that life would return to the way it had been before. But what they didn't know was that Erin's agreement to end the relationship was a facade. Beneath the surface, resentment and anger had begun to fester in Erin's heart. Instead of accepting her parents' decision, Erin began to harbor dark thoughts about how to free herself from their control. What began as teenage rebellion soon spiraled into something far more sinister, a path that would lead to unimaginable tragedy. Terry and Penny, believing the issue was behind them, could never have anticipated the storm that was brewing. They trusted their daughter, unaware that the next steps Erin took would lead to the devastating destruction of the family they had worked so hard to build. As Erin's resentment towards her family deepened, her internal conflict grew more intense. The rules and restrictions imposed by her parents, which had once seemed like the natural structure of her life, now felt like an insurmountable barrier. Charlie Wilkinson had become the center of her world, and in her young, impressionable mind, the only solution to being with him was to eliminate the source of the problem, her family. Instead of seeking ways to resolve the tension or understanding her parents' protective instincts, Erin's thoughts veered toward a dark, unimaginable solution: murder. Initially, Erin spoke about killing her parents in a casual manner. What started as offhand comments or expressions of frustration soon transformed into more serious conversations. Erin voiced her hatred and frustration to her close friends, perhaps seeking validation or even testing the waters to see if they would echo her sentiments. What might have been dismissed as a teenager venting about overbearing parents quickly became more deliberate. With each passing day, Erin's resentment festered, and she began to solidify her thoughts into a plan of action. The chilling aspect of Erin's plot wasn't merely the fact that she wanted her family dead. It was the cold, calculated manner in which she approached it. Rather than an impulsive act born out of rage, Erin took the time to meticulously plan the murders. She began gathering detailed information about the layout of the cafe home, providing critical intelligence to the eventual killers. Erin knew where each member of her family slept, the routines they followed, and the best time to strike. This level of forethought demonstrated a disturbing level of detachment from the reality of what she was planning, her ability to view her family not as loved ones, but as obstacles to be removed. By February 2008, Erin had expanded her deadly conspiracy beyond just herself and Charlie Wilkinson. She brought Charlie's friend, Charles Wade, into the fold, involving him in the plot. Wade, who was drawn to the promise of a financial reward, saw an opportunity to make easy money. He was promised $2,000, which was to be taken from the cafe home after the murders. Charles Wade's girlfriend, Bobby Johnson, also became part of the group, although she played a more passive role. Bobby's presence added a sense of normalization to the plot, as if this horrific plan could somehow be seen as just another rebellious act in the lives of misguided teenagers. Together, the group crafted a plan that grew more sinister with each discussion. The intent was clear. Charlie and Charles would enter the cafe home under the cover of night, kill the family, and set the house ablaze to destroy any evidence of their crimes. Erin, along with Bobby, would wait in the car, ensuring that their hands remained clean while their boyfriends carried out the killings. It was a plan that left no room for hesitation or second thoughts, and it bound the group in a pact of death. What made the plot even more chilling was the interaction between Aaron and Charlie as they discussed the need to eliminate all witnesses. Charlie, aware that Aaron had 2 younger brothers, raised the point that killing her parents alone would not be enough. If Matthew and Tyler were left alive, they could potentially identify the killers. In a moment that showcased Erin's complete emotional detachment from her family, she gave Charlie permission to kill her brothers. Her words, "I don't care, just do what you gotta do," illustrated the terrifying resolve she had reached. At that moment, any trace of familial love or sibling connection was obliterated by Erin's desire to be free from her parents' control. Charlie, despite some initial hesitance, was fully invested in Erin's plan. His love for her, twisted and warped by the intensity of their teenage emotions, drove him to agree to the killings. The promise of $2,000 for Charles Wade further solidified their commitment. The financial incentive for Wade removed any sense of morality or hesitation on his part. For him, this was just a transaction, a service for money. The night of February 28, 2008, was chosen for the murders. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the tension within the group escalated. The plan had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. Each member of the group had a role to play. Charlie and Charles would do the killing, while Aaron and Bobby would stay outside, waiting for the signal that it was done. The group was poised to commit an unspeakable atrocity, driven by teenage rebellion, misguided love, and greed. As the night wore on and the early hours of March 1st approached, the final pieces of the plan were falling into place. The Cafe family, completely unaware of the betrayal that was about to unfold, went to bed for what would be their final night together. Unbeknownst to them, their daughter, whom they had nurtured, loved, and protected, was about to become the architect of their demise. Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade, armed with cold determination, set off towards the Cafe family home under the veil of night. For the 2 men, this was no ordinary night. It was the culmination of a sinister plot born from a teenage love affair that had spiraled out of control. Wilkinson carried a .22 caliber pistol, while Wade had chosen something far more brutal, a samurai-style sword, its sharp blade glinting under the faint light of the moon. This combination of weapons was as cold and calculated as the plan itself, firearms for quick deaths, and the sword for unimaginable carnage. In the darkness of the early hours, Aaron and Wade's girlfriend, Bobby Johnson, sat in the car parked a safe distance from the Cafe home. Aaron was fully aware of what was about to happen inside the house where she had spent her childhood. Her family, the people who had raised and loved her, were about to be murdered at her request. There was no hesitation on her part. Instead of being consumed with fear or remorse, Aaron waited in detached silence, a chilling testament to how far her hatred and desire for freedom had pushed her. Inside the house, Terry and Penny Caffey lay asleep in their bed, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. Wilkinson and Wade, moving with the stealth of predators closing in on their prey, slipped through the shadows and entered the home. Their target was clear, the master bedroom where the parents lay defenseless. Wilkinson, filled with the twisted conviction that he was doing this for Aaron, pointed the pistol at the sleeping couple and pulled the trigger. The shots echoed through the house, a cacophony of violence breaking the stillness of the night. The bullets ripped through Terry and Penny as they lay in their bed, unable to defend themselves. Penny succumbed to the gunfire almost immediately, while Terry, despite being critically injured, clung to life. It was at this moment that Wilkinson's pistol jammed, a malfunction that left Penny fatally wounded but not fully dead. Charles Wade, ever ready to execute the most savage part of the plan, stepped forward with his sword. The scene was gruesome beyond words. Wade raised the blade and, with unrelenting brutality, struck Penny. The force of the blow nearly decapitated her, leaving her lifeless in the bed where she had once provided comfort and safety to her children. The sheer brutality of Wade's act was beyond anything that could be justified by the twisted logic of rebellion or desire. This was rage, pure and undiluted, channeled into an act of unspeakable cruelty. But the bloodshed was not over. Wilkinson and Wade now turned their attention to the upstairs bedrooms, where Aaron's two younger brothers, Matthew and Tyler, were hiding. The boys, only 13 and 8 years old, were the last remnants of the family that had to be silenced. Matthew, hearing the gunshots and the chaos below, must have known what was coming. When Wilkinson and Wade found him, he begged for his life. "Please no," he pleaded, his voice trembling with fear. In that moment, there was no mercy, no hesitation. Wilkinson, the boy who had once loved Aaron and promised her a future, shot Matthew in the face, killing him instantly. The innocence and youth of the boy meant nothing to him now. Matthew was simply an obstacle that needed to be removed. Tyler, the youngest, was no less a target. At only 8 years old, he stood no chance against the two armed men who had come to destroy his family. Wilkinson and Wade took turns with the sword, their blows merciless and final. The deaths of the two boys, carried out with such cold indifference, underscored the depravity of the entire plot. Not only had these young lives been snuffed out, but their futures, their potential, and the love they shared with their parents were erased in an instant. With the family now believed to be dead, Wilkinson and Wade turned their attention to looting the home. As promised, they collected valuables, fulfilling the financial aspect of Wade's involvement. They ransacked the house, gathering what they could before carrying out the final step of their plan, setting the house on fire. They doused the rooms in lighter fluid and ignited the blaze, ensuring that any remaining evidence of their crime would be consumed by the flames. The fire roared to life, engulfing the Caffey home in a matter of minutes. Outside, Aaron and Bobby watched the flames rise, knowing full well what had just taken place inside. For Aaron, this was supposed to be the beginning of a new life, one where she could be with Charlie, free from the constraints of her family's rules. She remained calm, detached from the reality that her parents and brothers lay dead inside the burning house. Her future was now tied to Charlie and the violence they had unleashed together. What none of them knew was that Terry Caffey, though gravely wounded, was not dead. Despite being shot 5 times and witnessing the massacre of his family, Terry's will to survive was stronger than the injuries inflicted on him. As the fire spread and the house crumbled around him, Terry found the strength to move. With every ounce of energy he had left, he crawled out of the bed, through the smoke and flames, and made his way to a nearby window. His body was battered, his vision blurred from the pain and blood loss, but somehow he managed to drag himself out of the house. In a superhuman effort, Terry began the long crawl through the dark woods that surrounded the house. With each movement, his injuries worsened, but the thought of survival, of seeking justice for his family, kept him going. He dragged his body through the brush, over roots and rocks, leaving a trail of blood behind him. It took Terry an hour to make the painful journey, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, just as his strength was about to give out, he reached the home of Tommy and Helen Gaston. The Gastons were shocked when they opened their door to find Terry, bloodied and barely conscious, but alive. They immediately called 911, summoning help for the man who had just lost everything. Terry's escape, against all odds, would be the key to unraveling the murderous plot that had left his family in ruins. It took Terry Caffey an agonizing hour to crawl to his destination. The nearest neighbors, Tommy and Helen Gaston, who lived a quarter of a mile away. Each inch of the journey was a battle for survival, as his body, riddled with bullet wounds, fought to shut down. By the time he reached the Gastons' front door, Terry was barely clinging to life. His clothes were soaked in blood, his body weak from the staggering amount of blood loss, and he was drifting in and out of consciousness. When Tommy Gaston opened the door, he was met with the sight of a man he knew well, but now barely recognized. Terry, usually strong and vibrant, was reduced to a bloodied and broken figure, barely able to form words. But Terry had one goal in mind: survival and justice for his slain family. Tommy Gaston, in complete shock, wasted no time in calling emergency services. His voice, trembling with urgency, relayed the horrifying situation to the operator. The dispatchers acted swiftly, sending paramedics and law enforcement to the scene. As the minutes passed and Terry's condition worsened, all anyone could do was pray that help would arrive in time. The paramedics, upon arrival, immediately recognized the severity of Terry's condition. Every second counted as they rushed him to the hospital in Tyler, Texas, a facility capable of handling such critical injuries. In the emergency room, doctors worked tirelessly to save Terry's life. He had been shot multiple times, the bullets wreaking havoc on his internal organs. Surgery was his only hope of survival, and even then, his chances were slim. As Terry was wheeled into the operating room, the question hung in the air: would he pull through? For hours, surgeons fought to repair the damage, stabilizing his condition and stopping the internal bleeding. It was a race against time, but miraculously, Terry survived the surgery. However, his recovery was far from over, and the road ahead was still treacherous. Despite the trauma his body had endured, Terry's mind remained sharp. As he began to regain strength in the intensive care unit, detectives were eager to hear what he had to say. Terry, still in immense pain, was now stable enough to provide crucial information. The authorities knew that he held the key to understanding what had happened that night, and more importantly, who was responsible. When Terry was able to speak, his voice was weak but determined. He recounted the night of terror, explaining how he had been shot and left for dead as his family was slaughtered. His memory, though blurred by pain, was clear enough to identify one of the attackers, Charlie Wilkinson. As soon as he spoke the name, the detectives knew they had a lead. Charlie was a familiar figure in the small town, especially due to his relationship with Aaron. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together. Armed with Terry's testimony, the local sheriff's department wasted no time. Wilkinson, a local teenager, was well known in the community, and his name quickly set the wheels of justice in motion. The investigators were confident that finding him would bring them closer to unraveling the full scope of the crime. As forensic teams descended on the cafe home, combing through the charred remains of the house, they uncovered more grim evidence. The lifeless bodies of Penny, Matthew, and Tyler were discovered amidst the ashes, confirming the full horror of what had transpired. The once happy and vibrant cafe home was now reduced to smoldering ruins, a heartbreaking reminder of the night's brutality. The investigation moved rapidly, with law enforcement tracking down Charlie Wilkinson at a trailer where he had been staying with his friend Charles Wade. Aaron Caffey, initially thought to be missing or perhaps a victim of abduction, was also found there. When the authorities arrived, Aaron was in a state of apparent shock, claiming she had been kidnapped by Wilkinson and Wade. She maintained that she had been taken against her will and had no knowledge of the murders until after they had occurred. Her performance seemed convincing at first, and the initial assumption was that she was another casualty of this senseless crime. However, as detectives began to interrogate Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade, the narrative quickly shifted. Both men, confronted with the overwhelming evidence against them, began to talk. Their confessions were chilling, not just for the brutal nature of the murders, but for the shocking revelation of who had orchestrated the entire plot. Both Wilkinson and Wade pointed directly at Aaron Caffey. According to them, Aaron had been the mastermind behind the murders from the beginning. It was she who had insisted that her family had to die so that she could be with Wilkinson. In fact, Wilkinson had initially suggested that they run away together, but Aaron had refused. She wanted her parents and brothers dead, leaving no obstacles in the way of their future together. The details provided by Wilkinson and Wade painted a chilling picture. Aaron had not only planned the murders, but had given detailed instructions about the layout of the house, where her family would be sleeping, and how to carry out the attack. She had waited outside, fully aware of the carnage taking place inside her home, as her family was slaughtered one by one. Her role in the murders was not that of a passive victim, but of an active conspirator who had set the deadly events in motion. Within 24 hours of the murders, Aaron Caffey's story crumbled. The detectives, now armed with the confessions of both Wilkinson and Wade, were able to piece together the true story. Aaron, far from being an innocent bystander, had orchestrated the killings with cold precision. They swiftly arrested Aaron Caffey, Charlie Wilkinson, Charles Wade, and Bobby Johnson. As the case moved to trial, all 4 suspects were charged with capital murder. The heinous nature of the crime led prosecutors to consider the death penalty for Wilkinson and Wade. Both men cooperated with investigators, confessing their roles but attempting to shift blame onto Aaron. Despite this, the prosecution sought harsh sentences for both, given the premeditated and brutal nature of the murders. Aaron's trial was more complex. Although she didn't physically commit the murders, the evidence against her as the mastermind was overwhelming. Her conversations with friends and her instructions to Wilkinson and Wade painted her as the driving force behind the crime. Bobby Johnson, though less involved, also faced charges for her role in the planning. In a surprising turn, Terry Caffey intervened during the sentencing, asking the prosecution not to pursue the death penalty for Wilkinson and Wade. His Christian faith and belief in forgiveness led him to request mercy for the men who had killed his family. As a result, Wilkinson and Wade were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Aaron received life with the possibility of parole after 40 years, a decision that shocked many, considering the magnitude of her betrayal. Bobby Johnson, for her lesser role, was sentenced to 40 years. After the trial, Terry Caffey faced the monumental task of rebuilding his life. Overwhelmed with grief, he admitted to contemplating suicide, but ultimately found solace in his faith. Remarkably, he maintained a relationship with Aaron, visiting her in prison despite the pain she had caused. Aaron, for her part, continued to deny her role as the mastermind, insisting she had been caught up in events beyond her control. Despite her claims, Terry's faith allowed him to forgive his daughter, though their relationship remained deeply strained. Terry later wrote a book, Terror by Night, recounting the events and his journey toward forgiveness. His story became one of survival and resilience, though the emotional scars remained. Aaron Caffey remains incarcerated, serving her life sentence at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. She will be eligible for parole in her mid-50s, but her actions remain a chilling reminder of the betrayal. Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade continue to serve life sentences without parole, while Bobby Johnson serves her 40-year sentence with the possibility of parole in the future. Their roles in one of Texas's most infamous family murders will never be forgotten. As we reflect on this tragic story, one can't help but wonder, could anything have been done to prevent such a devastating outcome? Was this horrific crime the result of a toxic love affair, misguided rebellion, or something even deeper? What do you think led Aaron to make such a drastic decision to destroy her own family? Could her punishment ever bring true justice, or will the wounds left behind by her betrayal remain forever open? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Aaron Caffey should ever be eligible for parole? And what impact do you think the possibility of forgiveness plays in such a heartbreaking case? If you found this story compelling, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth looks at cases that have left communities shaken to their core. We'll be back with more stories that will keep you questioning the darkest corners of the human mind.
Lossie Peterson was a vibrant 27-year-old woman who lived in Modesto, California with her husband, Scott Peterson. They appeared to have an idyllic life, living in a quaint 3-bedroom bungalow in an upscale neighborhood near East La Loma Park. Lacey, who was 8 months pregnant, was eagerly anticipating the birth of their first child, a boy they had decided to name Connor. She was a beloved member of her community, known for her warmth, charm, and devotion to family and friends. Lacey and Scott had met at California Polytechnic State University, where Scott studied agricultural business and Lacey pursued ornamental horticulture. They dated for 2 years before marrying in 1997 at the Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. After their wedding, they moved to San Luis Obispo, where they opened a sports bar called The Shack. Their entrepreneurial venture was initially successful, but they eventually sold the bar in April 2001 to move to Modesto and start a family. In Modesto, Lossie embraced her role as a homemaker, enjoying activities like cooking, entertaining, and gardening. She took a part-time job as a substitute teacher while Scott worked for Trade Corp USA, a fertilizer company, earning $5,000 a month. The couple's home was always immaculate, reflecting Lossie's meticulous nature and passion for creating a welcoming environment. She was deeply involved in preparing for the arrival of their son, having already decorated the nursery and frequently indulging in baby-related shopping sprees. Scott Peterson, meanwhile, projected the image of a dedicated husband and soon-to-be father. However, beneath this veneer lay a series of troubling behaviors and secrets. Scott had a history of extramarital affairs, the most recent being with Amber Frey, a massage therapist from Fresno. Amber, who was unaware that Scott was married, would later be a key figure in the investigation. On the evening of December 23, 2002, Lacey and Scott visited Salon, where Lacey's sister Amy Rocha worked. Amy cut Scott's hair, a monthly routine. During this visit, Scott mentioned that he would pick up a fruit basket for Amy the next day because he would be playing golf near the retailer. This detail would later become significant, as it was part of Scott's alibi for the day Lacey disappeared. The following day, Christmas Eve, Scott claimed he left home around 9:30 a.m., heading to the Berkeley Marina to go fishing. He told investigators that Lacey was watching a Martha Stewart show about marrying and preparing to mop the floor, bake cookies, and walk the family dog, Mackenzie. Scott's version of events included leaving a voicemail for Lacey around 2:15 p.m., stating, "Hey, beautiful, it's 2:15. I'm leaving Berkeley." Around 10:30 a.m. on December 24th, Karen Service, a neighbor, found Mackenzie wandering the neighborhood with a muddy leash. She returned the dog to the Petersons' backyard. Later, another neighbor, Mike Chiavetta, also saw Mackenzie outside around 10:45 a.m. By the early afternoon, Scott returned home to find Lacey's car in the driveway, but the house empty. He showered and washed his clothes, explaining that he had gotten wet while fishing. When Lacey failed to return home, Scott called her mother, Sharon Rocha, to see if Lacey was with her. Upon learning Lacey was missing, Sharon and Lacey's stepfather, Ron Gransky, contacted the Modesto Police Department, and detectives Alan Brocchini and John Buehler were assigned to the case. They arrived at the Peterson home on the evening of December 24, 2002. Inside the house, they found Lossie's keys, wallet, and sunglasses on the counter, her purse in a closet, and a phone book open to a full-page ad for a defense lawyer. These items indicated that Lacey had not left the house voluntarily. Scott's behavior during these initial interactions with the police raised suspicions. He was reportedly calm and cooperative, but his demeanor struck the detectives as unusual for a man whose pregnant wife was missing. He told the detectives that he had last seen Lacey around 9:30 a.m. when he left for a solo fishing trip at the Berkeley Marina. Scott's story about his activities that day included detailed descriptions of the fishing trip and his interactions with people he encountered at the marina, but his alibi was soon scrutinized. At the time of her disappearance, Lacey was 7.5 months pregnant, and the story quickly attracted national media attention. The initial hours and days of the investigation were crucial, as authorities began to piece together the timeline and circumstances surrounding Lassie's last known activities. The Modesto Police Department quickly mobilized search efforts. Volunteers and law enforcement officers canvassed the neighborhood, distributing flyers with Lassie's picture and searching nearby parks and waterways. Search dogs were brought in, and helicopters equipped with infrared sensors scanned the area. The community rallied, with hundreds of volunteers assisting in the search. The police set up a command center to coordinate the extensive search efforts, which were covered extensively by local and national media. As the search continued, investigators focused on Scott's alibi and behavior. They learned that Scott had purchased a boat on December 9th, just weeks before Lassie disappeared, but had not mentioned this to anyone. He had taken the boat out for a test run on December 20th, a fact he had also kept to himself. Investigators found it odd that Scott, an avid golfer, would choose to go fishing alone on Christmas Eve, a day typically spent with family. In the days following Lassie's disappearance, Scott's inconsistencies became more apparent. He initially told people he had been golfing on Christmas Eve, only to later change his story to fishing. Scott's interactions with the media also drew attention. During a candlelight vigil for Lassie, he was spotted laughing and joking, behavior considered inappropriate given the circumstances. Moreover, Scott sold Lassie's car and inquired about selling their home just days after she went missing, actions that seemed premature and callous. As the investigation progressed, police discovered Scott's extramarital affair with Amber Frey, a massage therapist from Fresno. Amber had met Scott on November 20th, 2002, through a mutual friend. Scott had told her he was single and had lost his wife. On December 30th, 2002, Amber contacted the Modesto Police Department after learning about Lassie's disappearance and Scott's deceit. She agreed to cooperate with the investigation and allowed the police to record their phone conversations. The recordings provided critical evidence. In these conversations, Scott continued to lie to Amber about his marital status, even after Lassie was reported missing. He did not disclose that his wife was missing and expressed no concern over the situation. Instead, Scott maintained a romantic and carefree demeanor, further implicating himself in the eyes of investigators and the public. As weeks turned into months, the search for Lassie Peterson continued with no significant breakthroughs. The media's intense focus on the case kept it in the public eye, and suspicions about Scott Peterson's involvement grew stronger. The police meticulously pieced together the timeline of Lassie's last known movements and Scott's activities on the day of her disappearance, but they lacked the concrete evidence needed to make an arrest. In April 2003, nearly 4 months after Lassie's disappearance, a gruesome discovery was made that would change the course of the investigation. On April 13th, a couple walking their dog along the San Francisco Bay shore near the Berkeley Marina found the decomposed body of a late-term male fetus. The next day, the body of a recently pregnant woman was found washed ashore about a mile away. The remains were badly decomposed, but it was clear that the woman had been pregnant, and the fetus had been expelled from her body after death, likely due to the natural processes that occur after a pregnant woman dies. DNA testing confirmed what many had feared. The bodies were those of Lassie Peterson and her unborn son Connor. The location of their discovery was chillingly close to where Scott had claimed to be fishing on December 24, 2002. This revelation cast an even darker shadow over Scott Peterson, who had been under intense scrutiny from both the media and law enforcement since Lassie's disappearance. The discovery of the bodies provided the physical evidence needed to arrest Scott Peterson. On April 18, 2003, Scott was apprehended near a La Jolla golf course. At the time of his arrest, Scott had dyed his hair blonde, grown a goatee, and had with him nearly $15,000 in cash, several credit cards belonging to his family members, and multiple cell phones. These items suggested to investigators that Scott was preparing to flee, further implicating him in the eyes of the public and the authorities. Scott Peterson was charged with 2 felony counts of murder on April 21, 2003, for the deaths of Lassie and Connor. The charges specified that Scott faced first degree for taking Lacey's life and second degree for the death of Connor. The decision to charge Scott with Connor's death as a separate count was made possible by California's fetal homicide law, which allows for the prosecution of individuals who'd unalive a fetus that has reached a certain stage of development. The prosecution's case against Scott Peterson hinged on several key pieces of evidence. First, there was the timeline of Scott's activities on the day Lacey disappeared, which included the suspicious circumstances of his fishing trip. Investigators believed that Scott had used his newly purchased boat to dispose of Lacey's body in the bay. Second, there was the affair with Amber Frey, which provided a motive for the crime. Amber's recorded conversations with Scott were particularly damning, as they revealed his deceit and lack of concern for his missing wife. The trial of Scott Peterson began on June 1st, 2004, in Redwood City, California. Due to the extensive media coverage and public interest in the case, it was decided that the trial would be moved from Modesto to ensure a fair trial. The trial was presided over by Judge Alfred DeLucci, and the lead prosecutor was Rick DiStasso, while Scott's defense was handled by high-profile attorney Mark Geragos. During the trial, the prosecution presented a compelling narrative that Scott had killed Lacey to escape the constraints of marriage and impending fatherhood. They argued that Scott wanted to be free to continue his affair with Amber Frey and pursue other romantic interests. The prosecution introduced evidence of Scott's deceit, his purchase of the boat, and the suspicious timing of his activities on the day Lacey disappeared. They also highlighted Scott's behavior in the days and weeks following Lacey's disappearance, including his attempts to sell their house and his apparent lack of concern for Lacey's well-being. The defense, on the other hand, argued that the evidence against Scott was purely circumstantial. They suggested that Lacey could have been abducted and murdered by someone else, pointing to reports of suspicious individuals in the neighborhood on the day she disappeared. The defense also challenged the prosecution's timeline and questioned the credibility of some of the witnesses. They argued that the lack of direct evidence linking Scott to the crime should result in his acquittal. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Lacey Peterson and second-degree murder for the death of Connor Peterson. The verdict was delivered on November 12, 2004. On March 16, 2005, Scott was sentenced to death by lethal injection and was sent to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. Amber Frey's cooperation with the police and her testimony had been instrumental in building the case against Scott Peterson. After the trial, Amber Frey wrote a book titled Witness for the prosecution of Scott Peterson, in which she detailed her relationship with Scott and her experiences during the investigation and trial. The book provided further insights into her perspective and the emotional toll the case had on her. Amber also made several public appearances and interviews, discussing her role in the case and advocating for victims of deceit and domestic violence. The public's reaction to the case's conclusion was deeply divided. On one hand, many people were convinced of his guilt, swayed by the circumstantial evidence and Scott's suspicious behavior. On the other hand, some members of the public and certain commentators believed that Scott Peterson might be innocent or that he had not received a fair trial. They argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial and that the media frenzy had biased public opinion and potentially the jury. The high-profile nature of the case also sparked discussions about the role of the media in the justice system, particularly regarding the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. After Scott Peterson's conviction and sentencing, the case continued to make headlines. In 2020, his death sentence was overturned by the California Supreme Court due to juror misconduct during the penalty phase of the trial. The court ruled that the trial judge had improperly dismissed prospective jurors who expressed opposition to the death penalty but indicated they could follow the law and impose it if necessary. This decision led to a new penalty phase trial being ordered, although Scott's conviction for the murders of Lacey and Connor was upheld. In recent years, the Los Angeles Innocence Project has taken up Scott Peterson's case, arguing that there is new evidence that could exonerate him. The Innocence Project claims that Scott's state and federal constitutional rights were violated and that critical evidence from the original trial was mishandled or overlooked. They have filed motions seeking access to this evidence, and their involvement has reignited public interest and debate about Scott's guilt and the integrity of the original investigation and trial. One of the key arguments presented by the Innocence Project involves allegations of juror misconduct during the original trial. They argue that one of the jurors, known as Strawberry Shortcake due to her red hair, failed to disclose her own history of domestic violence, which could have influenced her judgment. This juror's omission, they claim, violated Scott's right to an impartial jury, a cornerstone of the judicial process. In parallel, Scott's family has remained vocal in their support, consistently arguing that he was wrongfully convicted. They have maintained a public presence, advocating for his release and emphasizing what they perceive as flaws in the investigation and trial. The Peterson family's efforts have been crucial in keeping the case in the public eye and attracting support from legal organizations and individuals who believe in Scott's innocence. The Scott Peterson case has had far-reaching implications beyond the immediate legal battles. It has prompted discussions about the death penalty, the reliability of circumstantial evidence, and the potential for wrongful convictions. Legal experts and commentators have used the case to highlight the importance of rigorous forensic analysis, the need for impartial juries, and the ethical responsibilities of media coverage in high-profile cases. Furthermore, the case has influenced legal practices and reforms. The extensive media coverage and public interest have led to calls for stricter guidelines on how such cases are reported, aiming to prevent undue influence on public opinion and the judicial process. There have also been discussions about juror screening processes to ensure that individuals with potential biases are identified and excluded from serving on juries. As Scott Peterson's legal team continues to fight for a new trial or exoneration, the case remains a focal point for debates about justice, fairness, and the complexities of the American legal system.
"Do you think about me? Because I think about you all the time," Pamela said to Flynn. Pamela Smart was a 22-year-old media coordinator at Winnicott High School in Hampton, New Hampshire. In early 1990s, she began an illicit affair with 15-year-old student William Billy Flynn. Smart, who was also involved in producing media projects at the school, met Flynn through their mutual interest in the school's media program. The affair quickly escalated, driven by Smart's dissatisfaction with her marriage to Greg Smart, a 24-year-old insurance agent. Their affair began after Smart invited Flynn and another friend, Cecilia Pierce, over to her condo to watch the sexually explicit movie 912 Weeks. This film, known for its provocative scenes, set the stage for what would become an inappropriate and manipulative relationship between Smart and Flynn. Flynn later claimed that Smart initiated sex with him after sending Pierce to walk her dog, marking the start of their secret affair. Smart, a charismatic and assertive figure, used her maturity and position of authority to captivate Flynn, who was a naive and impressionable teenager. Over the following weeks, Smart and Flynn's relationship intensified. Smart showered Flynn with attention and affection, making him feel valued and significant. This attention was intoxicating for Flynn, who had never experienced such a relationship before. Smart allegedly began to manipulate Flynn emotionally, convincing him that they could only be together if her husband, Greg Smart, was out of the picture. She painted a dire picture of her marital situation, claiming that Greg was abusive and that a divorce was not a viable option due to financial constraints and societal pressures. Smart's manipulation of Flynn involved playing on his emotions and insecurities. She allegedly told Flynn that if he truly loved her, he would prove it by helping her remove Greg from their lives. This manipulation exploited Flynn's desire for love and acceptance, making him believe that committing this crime was an act of devotion. Smart's influence over Flynn was so strong that he began to accept the idea of taking a life as the only solution to their problem. To carry out the plan, Smart further manipulated Flynn by enlisting the help of his friends, Patrick Randall and Vance Latham Jr., both teenagers. She promised Flynn and his friends $500 each from the anticipated $140,000 life insurance payout she would receive from Greg Smart's policy. This promise of financial reward added an element of enticement to the already emotionally charged plot. The teenagers, under Smart's guidance, meticulously planned the act. They decided that the best time to carry it out would be when Greg came home from work, ensuring he would be caught off guard. Smart instructed them to stage the scene to look like a burglary gone wrong, which she believed would divert suspicion away from her. She allegedly provided details about the layout of the house and Greg's routines to aid them in their planning. On May 1st, 1990, the plan was put into action. Flynn, along with Patrick Randall and Vance Latham Jr., entered the Smart residence in Derry, New Hampshire. The teenagers were armed and mentally prepared for what they were about to do, driven by the manipulation and promises made by Smart. They had been instructed to make the crime appear as a burglary gone wrong to deflect any suspicion from Smart herself. As they waited inside the house, the atmosphere was tense, filled with a mix of adrenaline and fear. Flynn, who was both nervous and determined, had been convinced that this act was necessary for his future with Smart. When Greg Smart arrived home, he was taken by surprise. The ambush was swift and brutal. Flynn, following the plan, shot Greg in the head with a .38 caliber revolver, killing him instantly. The execution of the plan was cold and calculated, with Randall assisting by holding a knife to Greg's throat during the attack to ensure compliance. After the slaying, the teenagers ransacked the house to stage the scene as a botched burglary. They overturned furniture and scattered items around the room to make it look as though an intruder had been searching for valuables. This staging was meant to create a plausible scenario for the police, allowing the teenagers and Smart to avoid suspicion. However, the scene was not convincing enough to withstand scrutiny. Pamela Smart returned home later that evening to discover her husband's body and immediately called the police. Her demeanor during the call and subsequent interactions with the authorities raised suspicions. Investigators noted her composed and unemotional reaction, which they found inconsistent with someone who had just found their spouse deceased. This lack of visible distress, coupled with inconsistencies in her account of the events, led the police to question her version of the story. As the investigation progressed, the police initially considered the possibility of a burglary gone wrong, given the way the scene had been staged. However, as they delved deeper, the evidence began to point in a different direction. They discovered that the crime scene lacked typical signs of a struggle that would be expected in a home invasion. There were no signs of forced entry, which suggested that the perpetrator had access to the home, further raising doubts about the burglary narrative. Not long after the incident, the investigation took a significant turn when Cecilia Pierce, a 16-year-old student and intern at Winnicott High School's Media Center, came forward with crucial information. Pierce had been close to Pamela Smart and was aware of the affair with Billy Flynn. In conversations with Pierce, Smart had confided details about her relationship with Flynn and her frustrations with her marriage to Greg Smart. Pierce revealed to the authorities that Smart had openly discussed plans to eliminate her husband, a revelation that provided investigators with a direct link between Smart and the whole plot. Recognizing the potential of Pierce's testimony, the police asked her to cooperate further by wearing a wire to record conversations with Smart. Pierce agreed, and these recordings became instrumental in the investigation. Although the audio quality was poor, the recordings captured Smart making incriminating statements that indicated her involvement in the scheme. In one recorded conversation, Smart suggested that they would face severe consequences if the truth came out, indicating her awareness of the plot's criminal nature. These recordings, despite their technical limitations, were pivotal in building a case against Smart. Following the revelations from Pierce, the police intensified their investigation. Flynn, along with Patrick Randall and Vance Latham Jr., was brought in for questioning. Under intense interrogation, Flynn eventually confessed to the slaying, providing a detailed account of how Pamela Smart had orchestrated the entire plot. Flynn described the emotional manipulation he experienced at the hands of Smart, who had convinced him that killing Greg was the only way for them to be together. He recounted how Smart had planned the act, instructed him and his friends on how to execute it, and assured them of financial rewards. Randall and Latham corroborated Flynn's account, providing additional details about the planning and execution of the slaying. They testified that Smart had been the mastermind behind the plot, providing guidance and encouragement throughout the process. Their testimonies painted a picture of a calculated plan driven by Smart's desire to remove her husband from her life. Armed with these confessions and the evidence gathered from Pierce's recordings, the police arrested Pamela Smart on August 1, 1990, 3 months after the slaying. The arrest of Smart garnered significant media attention due to the sensational nature of the crime, involving a teacher-student affair and a sinister plot. The case became even more notorious as it was one of the first trials in the United States to be televised, allowing the public to follow the proceedings closely. Smart maintained her innocence, denying any involvement in the crime and claiming that she had been framed by the teenagers. However, the testimonies of Flynn, Randall, and Latham, along with other evidence gathered during the investigation, painted a compelling picture of her role in the crime. The trial of Pamela Smart began on March 4, 1991, at the Rockingham County Superior Court in Exeter, New Hampshire. It was one of the first high-profile cases in the United States to be televised gavel to gavel, capturing national attention with its mix of sensational elements. A young, attractive woman, a forbidden affair with a teenage student, and a brutal slaying. The prosecution, led by Assistant Attorney General Diane Nicolosi, argued that Pamela Smart was the mastermind behind the slaying of her husband, Greg Smart. They presented a narrative of manipulation and emotional coercion, where Smart used her relationship with Flynn to persuade him to take her husband's life. The prosecution's case was heavily based on the testimonies of Billy Flynn, Patrick Randall, and Vance Latham Jr., all of whom had entered plea deals in exchange for their cooperation. Flynn testified that Pamela Smart had seduced him, leveraging her allure and position of authority to manipulate him into believing that the only way they could be together was if Greg Smart was eliminated. Flynn described in detail how Smart had orchestrated the entire plot, providing specific instructions on how and when to carry out the slaying. He explained how Smart used emotional manipulation, convincing him that removing Greg was essential for their future together. Flynn recounted how Smart had instructed him to stage the crime scene to look like a burglary gone wrong, even down to specific details about how to make the crime look plausible. Patrick Randall and Vance Latham corroborated Flynn's testimony, adding their own accounts of the planning and execution of the crime. They described how Smart had been the driving force behind the plot, detailing the roles they were each assigned and how Smart had directed them throughout the planning process. Their testimonies painted a picture of a calculated plan masterminded by Smart, who had used her influence over Flynn and the other teenagers to achieve her goals. In addition to the testimonies, the prosecution presented physical evidence that linked Smart to the plot. This included phone records showing communication between Smart and the teenagers and notes that detailed aspects of the plan. The prosecution argued that Smart's motive was to escape an unhappy marriage and potentially benefit from Greg's $140,000 life insurance policy. They contended that this financial incentive, coupled with her desire to continue her relationship with Flynn, provided a compelling motive for her involvement in the crime. The defense, led by attorney Mark Sisti, maintained that Pamela Smart had no involvement in the crime and that she was being framed by the teenagers who were trying to mitigate their own culpability. Sisti argued that Flynn and his accomplices were the ones solely responsible for the crime and that Smart had been unaware of their plans. He emphasized the lack of direct physical evidence linking Smart to the crime scene and questioned the credibility of the teenagers' testimonies, suggesting that their plea deals provided them with strong incentives to lie. Smart herself took the stand, denying any involvement in the plot and asserting that her affair with Flynn had been a regrettable mistake but had nothing to do with her husband's death. She claimed that Flynn and the others had acted independently and were lying to protect themselves. Smart's defense highlighted the absence of any direct evidence placing her at the scene of the crime or directly linking her to the nefarious scheme, arguing that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on the statements of convicted felons. Throughout the trial, the defense sought to portray Smart as a scapegoat, a woman wrongfully accused in a high-profile case that had been heavily influenced by media coverage. They argued that the public's fascination with the case and the intense media scrutiny had created an atmosphere that was biased against her from the start. Despite these efforts, the jury ultimately found the testimonies and evidence presented by the prosecution more convincing. After 14 days of testimony and 18 hours of deliberation, the jury found Pamela Smart guilty on all counts: being an accomplice to first-degree slaying, conspiracy to taking a life, and witness tampering. The verdict was delivered on March 22, 1991, marking the end of a highly publicized trial that had captivated the nation. The courtroom atmosphere was tense as the jury's decision was announced, with Smart maintaining her composure despite the gravity of the situation. Smart was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The harsh sentence reflected the jury's belief in her central role in orchestrating the death of her husband, Greg Smart. This life sentence ensured that Smart would spend the rest of her life incarcerated, with no opportunity for parole or early release. In contrast, Flynn, Randall, and Latham received reduced sentences in exchange for their cooperation with the prosecution. Billy Flynn, who had confessed to shooting Greg Smart and testified against Pamela Smart, was sentenced to 28 years to life. His emotional testimony and cooperation with the authorities played a significant role in the case against Smart. Patrick Randall, who had held a knife to Greg Smart's throat during the act, received a sentence of 40 years to life. Vance Latham Jr., who had provided the getaway car and weapon used in the crime, was sentenced to 30 years to life. The plea deals offered to these teenagers were instrumental in securing their testimonies, which were critical to the prosecution's case. All three teenagers have since been released from prison. Flynn was granted parole in 2015, having served nearly 25 years behind bars. Randall and Latham were also released after serving their respective sentences. Their releases were contingent on their cooperation with the authorities and expressions of remorse during their parole hearings. The outcomes for Flynn, Randall, and Latham contrast sharply with Pamela Smart's continued incarceration, underscoring the severity with which the court viewed her role in orchestrating the slaying. Following her sentencing, Pamela Smart was initially incarcerated at the New Hampshire State Prison for Women before being transferred to Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York, where she remains to this day. While in prison, Smart has worked to better herself and others around her. She has earned 2 master's degrees, one in literature and one in legal studies, from Mercy College, funded by private donations. Smart has also become an advocate for women's rights in prison, joining the National Organization for Women, NOW, and participating in various educational and mentoring programs for fellow inmates. Despite these efforts, Smart's time in prison has been challenging. In October 1996, she was severely beaten by 2 fellow inmates who accused her of being a snitch. The attack left her with a fractured nose and a broken eye socket, requiring the insertion of a plastic plate in her face. The 2 inmates were convicted of second-degree assault and transferred to different facilities. This incident left Smart dealing with chronic pain and mental health issues, including thoughts of suicide. Smart has made several attempts to have her sentence reduced or to obtain a pardon, but all have been denied. She has filed multiple appeals, arguing that her trial was unfair and that she was wrongfully convicted. In 2005, the New Hampshire Executive Council unanimously denied her pardon request. Her last federal appeal was rejected in 2002, and in 2023 she lost her final appeal, cementing her life sentence without the possibility of parole. In recent years, Smart has continued to seek ways to reduce her sentence. On June 11, 2024, she released a videotaped statement in which she accepted responsibility for her husband's slaying for the first time. She expressed deep remorse and reflected on her past actions, acknowledging her role in the crime and the manipulation of Billy Flynn. This statement was part of an effort to seek clemency or a reduced sentence from the New Hampshire authorities. Throughout her incarceration, Smart has remained a controversial figure. While some view her as a manipulative mastermind who got what she deserved, others see her as a victim of her circumstances and a flawed judicial process. Her case continues to be a topic of interest and debate, inspiring books, movies, and documentaries that explore the complexities and nuances of the events surrounding the tragic passing of Greg Smart. On a quiet morning in Massapequa, New York, on May 19, 1992, an event occurred that would forever change the lives of three individuals. The protagonist of this story is Amy Fisher, a 17-year-old high school student. She wasn't just any teenager. She was involved in a secret, scandalous relationship with a man twice her age, Joey Buttafuoco. Amy Fisher was a high school student, just 16 years old, when she first met Joey Buttafuoco. Their paths crossed when Amy brought her car to Joey's auto body shop for repairs. Joey Buttafuoco was then a 36-year-old auto body shop owner. He was married to Mary Jo Buttafuoco, a devoted wife and mother. Joey and Mary Jo had built a life together, raising their children in what seemed to be a peaceful suburban setting. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a tumultuous and illicit affair between Joey and Amy, which would later erupt into the infamous Long Island scandal in 1992. Joey Buttafuoco, a charismatic and somewhat brash man, quickly developed a rapport with the young Amy. Despite the significant age difference, their relationship soon turned from professional to personal. Joey's charm and attention captivated Amy, who was navigating the tumultuous waters of teenage emotions and infatuation. Their relationship became sexual, although Joey initially denied this aspect vehemently to both the public and his wife. As their affair progressed, Amy became increasingly infatuated with Joey. She viewed him not just as a lover, but as a possible life partner. Joey, on the other hand, appeared to enjoy the attention and excitement that came with the affair. He showered Amy with gifts and affection, further deepening her emotional attachment to him. Joey's promises and reassurances led Amy to believe that he would eventually leave his wife, Mary Jo, for her. Amy Fisher's obsession with Joey intensified over time. She began to see Mary Jo Buttafuoco as the sole obstacle preventing her from being with Joey. This belief was compounded by Joey's continued involvement with Amy, even as he maintained his marriage to Mary Jo. The affair was not just a secret, it was a driving force in Amy's life, influencing her decisions and actions in profound ways. Joey Buttafuoco's denials of the affair added to the complexity of the situation. To the public, he presented himself as a victim of Amy's infatuation and a devoted husband wrongfully accused. Behind the scenes, however, he maintained his relationship with Amy, further complicating the narrative. His dual life, one as a family man and the other as Amy's lover, set the stage for the tragic events that would soon unfold. As Amy's obsession grew, so did her determination to remove Mary Jo from the equation. She fantasized about a life with Joey, free from the constraints of secrecy and guilt. This fantasy, however, was built on a fragile foundation of lies, manipulation, and emotional turmoil. Amy's young age and impressionable nature made her particularly vulnerable to Joey's influence, blurring the lines between right and wrong in her mind. The relationship between Amy Fisher and Joey Buttafuoco was a volatile mix of passion, deception, and desperation. It was a relationship that defied societal norms and ultimately led to a series of events that would devastate the lives of everyone involved. As the affair continued, the stage was set for the dramatic and violent confrontation that would forever change their lives and capture the nation's attention. On May 19, 1992, the tension and obsession that had been building in Amy Fisher reached a tragic climax. Driven by a desperate desire to secure her place with Joey Buttafuoco, Amy decided to confront the perceived obstacles standing in her way: Joey's wife, Mary Jo Buttafuoco. On that fateful day, Amy drove to the Buttafuoco residence in Massapequa, New York. Armed with a .25 caliber handgun, she approached the house, her mind set on a confrontation that she believed would change her life forever. As she reached the front door, she rang the bell, and Mary Jo Buttafuoco answered. What followed was a brief but devastating encounter. Amy initially attempted to engage Mary Jo in conversation, showing her a T-shirt from Joey's auto body shop as a pretense for her visit. She claimed to have a car issue and mentioned that Joey had sent her over. This tactic was likely an attempt to disarm Mary Jo and create a moment of confusion. However, as the conversation progressed, Amy's true intentions became clear. Without warning, Amy pulled out the handgun and shot Mary Jo in the head at point-blank range. The bullet struck Mary Jo just below her right ear, lodging at the base of her brain. Despite the severity of her injuries, Mary Jo did not immediately lose consciousness. Instead, she managed to call for help, drawing the attention of neighbors who quickly came to her aid and summoned emergency services. The immediate aftermath of the shooting was marked by chaos and confusion. The tranquil neighborhood of Massapequa was suddenly thrust into a state of panic. As Mary Jo Buttafuoco lay bleeding on her front porch, neighbors who heard the gunshot rushed to her aid, calling 911 for emergency assistance. The rapid response of first responders was critical in ensuring that Mary Jo received the urgent medical care she needed to survive the life-threatening injury. Police and emergency medical personnel arrived swiftly, securing the scene and tending to Mary Jo's fatal injuries. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The bullet caused significant damage, resulting in partial paralysis on one side of her face and deafness in one ear. The doctors decided that attempting to remove the bullet would be too risky, so it remained lodged in her neck. Her recovery would be long and arduous, but more on that later. Meanwhile, the detectives began canvassing the area for witnesses and gathering evidence. The urgency of the investigation was palpable. A violent crime had been committed in broad daylight, and the police were determined to apprehend the perpetrator swiftly. Joey Buttafuoco, upon being informed of the attack on his wife, hurried to the scene. His initial reaction was one of shock and disbelief. When questioned by the police, Joey provided the name of Amy Fisher, describing her as a frequent visitor to his auto body shop and one of his recent customers. Joey's prompt identification of Amy as a person of interest was a crucial lead for the investigators. Despite his cooperation in identifying Amy, Joey Buttafuoco was quick to deny any romantic involvement with her. He insisted that their relationship was strictly professional, with Amy visiting his shop for car repairs and nothing more. Joey's denials were emphatic, and he portrayed himself as a devoted husband who had no knowledge of Amy's intentions or the violent acts she had committed. As the police investigation intensified, they began to piece together a more comprehensive picture of the events leading up to the shooting. They discovered that Amy Fisher had not only been romantically involved with Joey, but had also become increasingly obsessed with him. This obsession culminated in her decision to eliminate Mary Jo, whom she saw as the primary obstacle to her relationship with Joey. Immediately after, the police zeroed in on Amy Fisher as the prime suspect. Based on Joey Buttafuoco's information and the rapidly gathered evidence, authorities moved quickly to locate and apprehend Amy. The arrest took place without incident. Amy Fisher was taken into custody, and the formal charges were soon laid out: attempted slaying. This charge reflected the premeditated nature of the crime, as Amy had driven to the Buttafuoco residence with a clear intention to confront and harm Mary Jo. Upon her arrest, Amy Fisher was subjected to a thorough interrogation. The detectives aimed to unravel the details of her relationship with Joey Buttafuoco and her motivations for the attack. During these interrogations, Amy maintained that Joey had influenced her actions, claiming that he had manipulated her emotions and encouraged her to view Mary Jo as an obstacle to their future together. This narrative positioned Amy as a manipulated teenager, caught in the web of an older man's deceit. As the investigation proceeded, the evidence against Amy mounted. Eyewitness accounts, forensic evidence, and Amy's own statements painted a damning picture. The police discovered letters and notes between Amy and Joey, revealing the depth of their involvement and Amy's escalating obsession. Additionally, physical evidence, such as the handgun used in the shooting and the t-shirt Joey had given Amy, corroborated the story that she had been at the Buttafuoco home with violent intent. Amy's trial began in September 1992. During the proceedings, the prosecution portrayed her as a Long Island Lolita, a term coined by the media to describe her as a young seductress led astray by an older man. The defense countered by depicting Amy as a misguided teenager who had been emotionally manipulated by Joey. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Amy ultimately decided to plead guilty to first-degree assault as part of a plea bargain. In December 1992, she was sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 5 years. Amy served 7 years in total before being released on parole in 1999. Joey Buttafuoco's legal battles were equally dramatic. Initially, Joey denied any sexual relationship with Amy and any involvement in the planning of the attack. However, as the investigation continued, evidence began to surface that contradicted his claims. Witnesses and physical evidence suggested that Joey had indeed been involved with Amy in a more than professional capacity. In October 1993, Joey Buttafuoco was charged with statutory assault after admitting to having a sexual relationship with Amy Fisher when she was 16 years old, below the age of consent in New York. Joey pleaded guilty to the charge and was sentenced to 6 months in jail, of which he served 4 months before being released on good behavior. Throughout the legal proceedings, the media played a significant role in shaping public perception of the case. The dramatic elements of the story, a teenage girl involved in a passionate affair with a married man, a violent attack on an unsuspecting wife, and the subsequent legal battles, provided a wealth of material for media exploitation. Regarding Mary Jo Buttafuoco, after the traumatic shooting incident, she faced a long and painful recovery process. The bullet lodged in her neck caused partial paralysis on one side of her face and left her deaf in one ear. Despite the physical and emotional scars, Mary Jo exhibited remarkable resilience. She underwent numerous surgeries, including a significant one in 2017, to repair her partially paralyzed face, which allowed her to smile fully for the first time in 25 years. Mary Jo's journey to recovery wasn't just about physical healing. She also had to grapple with the emotional aftermath of the attack and her husband's infidelity. For many years, she stood by Joey, defending him publicly and trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for their children. However, in 2003, she decided to divorce Joey, a decision that marked a turning point in her life. In 2009, Mary Jo published a memoir titled "Getting It Through My Thick Skull: Why I Stayed, What I Learned, and What Millions of People Involved with Sociopaths Need to Know." The book provided an in-depth look at her experiences and offered insights into the psychological manipulation she endured. Mary Jo's story of survival and empowerment resonated with many, and she has since become an advocate for victims of violence and those dealing with facial paralysis. Amy Fisher was released on parole in 1999 after serving 7 years in prison. Initially, she attempted to lead a more conventional life, marrying Louis Balera in 2003 and having 3 children. She also wrote another memoir, If I Knew Then, which detailed her side of the story and her life after the scandal. However, Amy's notoriety followed her, and she struggled to escape the shadow of her past. In 2007, a sex tape she had made with her husband was leaked, leading to a career in the adult entertainment industry. Amy starred in several adult films and made appearances in strip clubs, a decision that sparked further media attention and controversy. Despite these ventures, Amy expressed regrets about her past actions and attempted to rebuild her life multiple times. Amy and Louis Balera eventually divorced in 2015. She continued to make sporadic appearances in the media and remained a figure of public interest, particularly for those who remembered the original scandal. As of 2024, Amy Fisher is still active as a webcam model. Joey Buttafuoco's life after the scandal was marked by continued legal issues and attempts to capitalize on his notoriety. After serving his sentence for statutory assault, Joey and Mary Jo moved to California. However, his legal troubles didn't end there. In 1995, he was arrested for soliciting a prostitute, which violated his probation and resulted in additional jail time. Joey's criminal activities extended into the 2000s. In 2004, he pleaded guilty to auto insurance fraud, receiving a 1-year jail sentence and a lifetime ban from the auto body industry in California. His legal problems persisted with another arrest in 2005 for possession of ammunition. Despite these issues, Joey attempted to leverage his infamy into a Hollywood career. He made appearances in various TV shows and movies, including a stint on Celebrity Boxing, where he fought against Amy Fisher's husband, Louis Balera. In 2005, Joey remarried Ivanka Franco, but his life remained turbulent due to his criminal record and public image. The Amy Fisher and Joey Buttafuoco scandal, marked by betrayal, deceit, and violence, captivated the public's imagination and remains one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. The case serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of manipulation and the far-reaching impacts of violent actions. It also underscores the resilience of those who, like Mary Jo Buttafuoco, managed to rebuild their lives despite overwhelming adversity. That being said, if you found this story compelling, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe that Amy Fisher, a teenager and underage at the time, was truly manipulated by Joey Buttafuoco? Or was she acting on her own accord? Was Joey's sentencing justified given the severity of his actions and their impact on Amy's life? And finally, be sure to share a few words about the bravery and resilience of Mary Jo Buttafuoco in her remarkable journey of recovery. We'd love to hear your perspectives on this case. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime cases that shock the world. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.